Hey everybody, welcome to Sex is Medicine, your number one resource for holistic sex education, where we offer intimate conversations about sexuality, spirituality, pleasure, and personal growth. I am your host, Miss Devi Ward Erickson, and I am joined this evening with my esteemed colleagues and graduates from our school, Miss Karen Craig and Rosie Bitts. And today we're going to have a conversation about the dark side of modern Tantra and sacred sexuality in the West. And this conversation was stimulated by a recent podcast that I'm going to speak about in a little bit that was offered on BBC, which was an expose into a cult, essentially, of sacred sexuality. In the recent years, there have been several deeply disturbing exposés about sexual abuse, violations, and misconduct in the Tantra and sacred sexuality industry. There have been several credible claims of abuse and misconduct that have been lodged against various well-known Tantra schools. And at least one person has had criminal charges filed against them. There may be more, but I know specifically of one person. In November 2020, BBC Radio released a 10-episode podcast expose on the One Taste cult, which is not Tantra, but is often confused with or associated with Tantra in the West. In this episode, we are going to explore the troubling climate of abuse in the Western sacred sexuality industry, the importance of lineage and accountability, and we're going to discuss some red flags for you, the consumer, to watch out for when you are searching in your area for Tantra and sacred sexuality professionals to work with. So once again, I'd love to introduce you to my esteemed colleagues, incredible blazing practitioners out in the world, Karen Craig of exploretantra.com and Rosie Bitts of rosiebitts.com. Thank you again for joining me.
You're welcome. Glad to be here.
Yay. So we've talked offline about this topic, which is why we wanted to get together and have this conversation in public online to put out an alarm call, essentially, so that you, the consumer, you people out there who are interested in sex education, sexuality, understand what's going on. Because we are literally immersed in the field, we see a lot of stuff that you, the consumer, don't get to see. And so when appropriate, we want to make you aware of that. So let's discuss some of the things that we're seeing that are ringing the alarm bells. So Rosie, for you are in Victoria, British Columbia, and you are part of a community there and have been part of a community there for decades. And so what are some of the things that you're seeing in your community in the recent times that are really, really raising alarms for you?
So, yeah, when I came into Tantra, I was very much like, it doesn't matter what kind of Tantra they're doing, if it's Neo, if it's Lineage, it's great that we all just get, a better connection with our bodies and with our sexuality. Woohoo! And I've really changed my tune since those early days, because what I'm seeing is dangerous. It's just straight up dangerous. I'm seeing people with little to no training, certifying people as teachers, not just bringing them through their own course, but certifying them as teachers. I'm hearing some very serious sexual misconduct. I'm hearing hearing about practitioners sexualizing sessions for clients who are working with trauma in a way that was never, like, what people I think sometimes don't understand is we do not sexualize what's going on in our sessions. We're there for healing. There is an element of sexuality because we're working with the sexuality, but we're not sexualizing it. We're certainly not trying to get into sexy states with our clients. That goes against our code of ethics. There are people who are working with clients who have deep trauma and telling them that they have to heal them via having sex with them, or even putting them into a meditative state and starting to add sexualized suggestions in that. Like, there's some scary shit. And there's people here who are like, you don't need to see a counselor, you don't need to see a doctor, just see me. If you're deeply depressed, just see me. If you have any issue, just see me, right? So they're really isolating their clients, which to me is terrifying. Like, that sets people up to be able, like, to really open up to deeper levels of trauma when they're already so vulnerable. So I'm seeing some scary stuff. I really, I kind of do my own thing here on Vancouver Island, and I've been hearing things from various people coming to me and saying, Rosie, did you realize this was going on? Or somebody saying, hey, a local practitioner actually just hit on me on Facebook. Is that okay? And I'm like, so not okay.
Yeah. So there's so much there. I mean, there's so much in what you shared about the consistent air of abuse that is allowed to fester in the realm of, I'm going to say, Neo Tantra. We're going to explore a lot of reasons for that. But what really is concerning and profoundly alarming to me is the working with trauma survivors without qualifications. Thinking that reading a book about Tantra or going to a weekend workshop or even a 4-week training is going to prepare you and qualify you to work with deep levels of trauma. And that's a huge concern for me in this industry when there's uncertified people or untrained people then certifying other people to work with trauma, which is a big buzzword, which again, when I broke into this industry 13 years ago with actual lineage-based teachings and an understanding of how they work to heal and repair trauma, like the word trauma was not being thrown around in the sacred sexuality world. That it was not like a buzzword like it is now, right? It's become a buzzword in the last 13 years. And so, it's trendy to say that your methods help heal and resolve trauma, but without the support of a qualified instructor, you're going to re-traumatize that person. There's a huge potential for being re-traumatized. And then particularly if you're sexualizing sessions. What does that mean? Just so our audience is clear, what does it mean if a practitioner sexualizes a session?
So what I'm seeing, or what I've been hearing happening here in town, which is like blowing my mind, is there's, one particular instructor I know of specifically who also was a certified counselor and has actually removed his certified counseling credentials so he could continue on, who was actually having sex with people, right? So he was actually, like, people would come to him for, to deal with, say, sexual abuse trauma or their issues with boundaries or whatever. And he'd be like, I think we need to take it to this level. And even the people that I've heard from who he wasn't having sex with without their consent, he'd put them, he'd be like, let's do a little meditation together, a little tantric meditation. And then he'd be slipping in sexualized images and ideas to that meditation, which they're like, hey, I didn't consent to this. This is, and I think what happens, and what I've had people say to me, they're like, is that Tantra? And I'm like, oh, hell no. Mm-hmm. I think there needs to be a clarity for people overall that in my sessions, even if I'm working hands-on with somebody, I got my clothes on. I am a professional. It is never about my own sexual gratification. It's often not even like a juicy, hot, erotic situation. You know what I mean? Like, you've got to get a little fire to just give to that client. But there's not an eroticism in the room. It's healing. It's a lot nicer than going to the gynecologist, but think of it in that zone where the healing is for the client. There are boundaries set up, many boundaries, and there's deep levels of consent, verbal, body, everything that you keep checking in. And even to that end, I very rarely work hands-on with clients because I really believe I can teach them how to heal themselves. Why do they need my hands on them 99% of the time?
Yeah. So it's not, we're not offering an erotic service. We're offering healing. And I'm with you. That was why I designed the school and our curriculum the way I did, is because how empowering is it for us to become our own healers? And that's one of the reasons that I love working with couples. It's like, why don't we teach couples how to be each other's healers, right? And if you're in a loving, healthy relationship, you're going to heal in the light of love in a way that you won't with someone in a professional circumstance. And that doesn't degrade or diminish the fact that there are, like, somatic sexological body work is incredible therapy. There are incredible hands-on tantric healers who are incredible incredibly therapeutic. There's sex workers that offer healing that is incredibly therapeutic. So it isn't the hands-on that's an issue. It's what we are bringing to it, our intention and our motivation. And unfortunately, in the world of Tantra and sacred sexuality, there is a habit and a propensity of many practitioners projecting their eroticism onto their clients, trying to have their erotic needs fulfilled through their professional work, which is why we have a code of ethics to prevent that. What are some of the things that you're seeing, Karen, or have seen in the field of sacred sexuality that are troubling and alarming for you?
So the same kinds of things that Rosie mentioned, and some of them aren't as clear, I mean, have sex with me, or someone, like trying to jump someone's bones. It's like, yeah, that's really clear, but it's really sort of more in those gray areas that sometimes become an issue. So like it's innuendo, that suggestion that, this is what you need, and this will help, you break through whatever issues you've been dealing with, whether it's, outright assault or just other trauma that you've experienced, and especially sexual trauma. It may be asking questions about their sex life, like, what do you like to do? Or do you like to do this? Or do you like to do that? When it's an inappropriate question from someone who's there as your healer.
Yes.
And I think a lot of it really is, or at least some of it, I mean, yeah, a lot of it is because of the lack of, ethical boundaries and lineage and all of that, but it's the healers not being healed themselves.
Exactly.
And that's what's so critical, because they're not only trying to get their erotic needs met, they're really subconsciously or consciously trying to deal with their own inner confusion or their own traumas that they've sustained, and trying to work that out in a setting that's totally inappropriate. I mean, that's what counselors and coaches and therapists are for. Yeah. And I love the fact that in this modality, it's like, you've got to get your stuff right. It's like the first half of it, Tantra mastery is about you and for you and your own transformation and healing and all of that. And that's so critical. And that be a part of really your sort of ongoing life, because there's always going to be layers of things. So, I mean, that's kind of been like my concern, is that there's so many people out there who are unhealed, but hanging out a shield, or hanging out, their name, and saying that they're right, that they're a healer, and offering tantric healing or healing in the realm of sacred sexuality or whatever it is, and are really re-traumatizing and more deeply traumatizing those people who've come before them.
And what you just said really sparked something to me. Offering tantric healing, I think the root of the issue for me is the bastardization of the word tantra. What they're doing is not fucking tantra. It's not tantra. And that was, that's one of the reasons that we called what we were doing authentic tantra, because I didn't have any exposure to Neo Tantra before I was trained in Tibetan 5-element Tantra. So I was like totally naive. I had no freaking idea whatsoever. I was like, oh, this is weaving light and sound with form. It's a 5 elements. It's chakra yoga. It's this, this somatic thing. And you're doing this energy body yoga, and it's for realization. And Naguma and Sukha Siddhi and Yeshe Sogyal, they were all fucking themselves to enlightenment. Like, that was my understanding of Tantra. And then we moved to Vancouver, and I found that the Tantra was code for sex work. So I'm like advertising like Tantra coaching sessions where I'm going to teach people to meditate and do their hands on, and they're calling me for body massages. And I was like, what the fuck? I was so confused. And that's part of the issue, is the way Tantra has the word Tantra has literally been bastardized in North America to mean basically sensual massage. I don't know how the fuck they got from energy body medicine and chakra yoga to fucking massage. I don't know how that happened.
Well, the way it's happened is that we've had people come in and bastardize it. Like, for instance, a lot of people are going to disagree with this, but look at Osho. Sure enough, he's written many beautiful things, but that guy was doing some nefarious shit. He was running a cult. And one of the biggest surges in the last 100 years around Tantra, and much around Neo Tantra that we have right now, goes back to Osho. And he was screwing everybody for their enlightenment, but not, right?
Yeah. So some Indian dude essentially took advantage or, or whatever, or, created this cult around sexual abuse, and that's our understanding. So at the root of Western Neo-Tantra is sexual abuse, it sounds like. So no wonder it bears that fruit.
Absolutely.
Well, and it's also appropriation.
Yes.
And that's what happens when things are appropriated, because what that means is you've kind of taken the part that you find most interesting or most marketable or whatever it is, and you've kind of scooped that off the top and left the roots, left the substance of it. And so that appropriation then is not connected to the lineage, is not connected to the roots or the original intention. And so then it's, by definition, like going to be fraught with, like problems and issues, and going to lend itself to people becoming, it's a distortion. So then whoever you feed it to is going to be distorted in some way.
Absolutely.
It's really, honestly, a toxin. It becomes toxic, when it's separated from its roots. Like even in nature, you separate something from its roots and it becomes toxic.
Yes.
So
yes, and that's absolutely correct. I was reading about like the origins of Neo-Tantra, and they are rooted in the colonization of India, like back in the late 1800s. And then the term Neo-Tantra was coined like in 1890, early 1900s as this like nouveau this Western interpretation of this ancient tradition that literally the people could not practice without being freaking murdered, so it's like the people from who carried this tradition for thousands and thousands of years were suppressed and oppressed from practicing their tradition, and then basically Northern Europeans stole it and stole the juicy bits off the top, or the parts that they wanted, while at the same time denying and negating and what is the word, denying and negating the roots of the tradition. Yeah, and so it's just, you're entirely correct. It's become poison since then.
And what is really scary, getting even away from the sexuality, is these have been sacred and secret teachings often, right? And for a reason. So even when people are bringing something forward that is part of a lineage-based tradition, but they are not part of that, there is power there, and done without lineage, done without the spiritual safeguards and teachers and sangha, there can be some real disruption that happens in people. People can lose their minds. They can fucking go crazy, literally, because there's power to this. And at the very least, they can have their, energetic channels really blown out. And then they're left going, why do I feel so awful?
That's a really good point, when it's not anchored in lineage. And so, yeah, I observe that. For me, you're totally correct that like when you tap into lineage, it's like a pipeline of energy coming down through and to you, and correct motivation is so key. And so that's, one why this stuff is happening in the field of Neo-Tantra and sacred sexuality in the West is, number one, that's what I look to as well, is the lack of authentic root anchor in a lineage-based tradition. And the benefit of that isn't just because, we're so great, we get to be all puffed up, but it's like, it's the motivation. I am a Vajrayana tantric Buddhist. I take refuge every single morning and align body, speech, and mind with positive thought, positive speech, positive action. I daily state my intention to live by the 6 perfections, blah, blah, blah. And I have a Lama who, if I did some crazy ass shit, would shut my school down. If I was abusing students, he would be like, yeah, take a time out, Devi. You're practicing incorrectly. And then also my spiritual beliefs. I believe in karma. I don't want to fuck people over because I don't want to have to deal with that in another lifetime, right? It's like I've had to deal with enough shit in this lifetime. Why would I want to abuse more people? Like, why would I want to do that? It doesn't make any sense. It's self-sabotaging. So Go
I
on.
was gonna say also too, those of us who are Vajrayana Buddhists, we also take an oath of doing things for the highest good of all sentient beings, not just a few who come to us, not just, the chosen few, all sentient beings, right? Every time I see a client, in my mind, is this the highest good for this client and for all sentient beings?
Yes, exactly. So that motivation that is rooted in this particular tradition is essential because we are teaching methods from this tradition and we are continuing to drink from the well of this tradition and be in alignment. And the more in alignment I am, the more potent my teachings become and the more efficacy the more the teachings are transmitted with effectiveness.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do you see, Karen? Why for you? What are some of the reasons that this shit is going down in the way it is?
Well, I mean, certainly what I said and what both of you have said. And these traditions are really, they're oral transmissions. Like that's the root of it. And so in the West, like the written word is exalted. And anything that's an oral transmission is considered more primitive.
Yeah.
When really it's the other way around, because, I see people, and not to, diss anyone's thing, but, like shamans, for example, they'll take a class, they'll so on and so forth. And now I'm a shaman. And it's like shamans, like these were like, I mean, first of all, a family lineage, but also like a cultural lineage and a spiritual lineage that was passed from, father to son and so on and so forth. This way, you don't read a book or watch a YouTube or even take a course and become a shaman. So, for example. And so it's the same with this kind of thing, when you're talking about Tantra and Tantra versus sort of what's out there commercially as Tantra and authentic Tantra, is the lineage really provides protection. It's like an umbrella over it, because I'm going to make sure that the person I'm teaching is doing and learning I'm transmitting it. I'm not only just teaching, but I'm transmitting the energy, I'm transmitting the practices. And so that's a protection over the practice, as opposed to me just going out there and reading some books and watching some YouTubes and maybe taking some workshops. And now, I've certified myself, to teach. I mean, it's like when you do that, you don't have that, what I call umbrella of protection, so that the integrity of the practices themselves is preserved.
And there's a huge difference between intellectually understanding something and having embodied wisdom. That is Tantra yoga. Tantra yoga is the practice of cultivating wisdom awareness arising from the inside out. It isn't about accumulating information to stimulate the intellect. There's all kinds of books and texts written by like Karmapa and shit about the difference between an intellectual understanding of Tantra versus the embodied wisdom. And embodied wisdom comes from your practice. It comes from your awakening, your own realization literally from your cells. And the lineage-based teachings are tools to do that. And I'll just leave it there. So yes, that's the benefit of lineage. The other thing that I see that is an issue is the lack of regulation in this industry, right?
Yes.
Because it's this fringe, sexy, nouveau thing. There's no freaking standards. There's no regulation. There's no one to hold you accountable. That's the other issue with lineage. Like I said, with Lamatashi, if I was doing some crazy shit, he'd be like, oh, look, there's my spiritual teacher giving me accountability. And in terms of Western regulatory boards, there's none of that in regards to Tantra. Until recently, we're in the process of creating that, but that's huge. So that's one of the reasons that I see that like people can just read a book and then decide that they're certifying people, is because there is no regulation in the industry of modern Tantra.
And there's also not an understanding. I touched on this earlier, but our audience, our clients, the people we're working with, they don't have a deep understanding. So sometimes they're going into these workshops or working one-on-one with people, and they're like, oh, that's Tantra?
Yes.
Okay, maybe that's just not for me. I don't like it. They don't realize the differences, and a lot of like, even talking to other people who have been reading, not quote unquote reading, they have been reading, but reading about different types of Tantra, they have no idea what I do. Like there's no definition of what authentic Tantra or lineage-based Tantra looks like. As opposed to Neo Tantra, there's also no definition of what the different Neo Tantras look like.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's concerning. I know like when I get tapped for interviews and stuff, they're like, oh, talk about Tantra. I'm like, well, the first thing is that not all Tantra is the same. And what Joe Blow is calling Tantra is not what I'm doing. So there's this misconception that you're like, it's like if you go to any Tantra workshop, you're going to learn the same stuff. And there is crossover for sure with some of the methods and the techniques, but the root and foundation of Tantra is, why are you practicing? What is your motivation? And then the variances between lineages of what the word Tantra actually means. Like in our lineage, the word Tantra means to weave light and sound with form. Light is visualization, sound is mantra, the form is the body. So you can apply these codes of light and sound to any form that you're doing, and therefore make it a form, an expression of Tantra yoga. Well, that was my understanding of Tantra coming into the field. And basically, if you're not weaving light and sound with form, you're not doing Tantra. Because according to our lineage, that is actually correct.
Yeah, totally. And there's many, that I think this is what's very confusing and where there's a lot of challenge, is a lot in the Neo Tantra, there's no touch on any type of spirituality. Right?
But if it's not spiritual, then it's not Tantra.
Well, and which is totally what I like when I talk about Tantra. I'm like, guys, like, yeah, it's sexy. Yeah, you're gonna have better orgasms, but that's actually to some degree the side benefit. We use that sexuality as the battery pack for healing everything, as opposed to come to my class, learn how to rub your genitals better to have a better orgasm, which I love that if it's done with ethics and integrity, but that's not what we do in Tantra.
Yes, yeah, that's not the goal, and it's not the goal, and it's one of the results and benefits, but it's not the intention, the primary motivation, or the primary goal of actually practicing Tantra.
Exactly.
I wanted to address, Devi, what you were saying about the lack of oversight.
Yeah.
So for me, that was one of the things that actually attracted me to this modality, to authentic Tantra, was the fact that there was a code, or there is a code of ethics. And from my background, I have a legal background, so I'm accustomed to that. The code of professional responsibility. There may be people who are breaching it, but there's something to breach.
Yes.
And there are avenues, somebody can become disbarred or whatever it is. Mm-hmm. And that's important, because that protects the client, the customer, the end user. And those are the people who need the protection. Those are the people, our clients, our students, those people who are coming because they've been traumatized and they're seeking healing, or they don't even know that it's trauma. They just know, things in their life aren't working the way they want them to, and so then they're coming seeking wholeness and are further broken, which, is just an abomination to me. But, that absence of that level of oversight, for licensed therapists, a counselor, like, there is a body that has a code of ethics, and they have to sign that before they can practice. And if they breach that, they can lose their license to be counselors, to be, psychologists, therapists. They can't do that. They can't have sex with their clients, yep. And that kind of thing, without losing their ability to work in that field. So
as you're talking, what comes to mind is, why would anyone not want to operate under an ethical code of conduct, or why would they want to not operate under some kind of umbrella of accountability, unless they intentionally want to cause harm? Like, why would you not? Like, why are we the only freaking Tantra school that has a fucking code of ethics?
It may not be necessarily a nefarious intent, that I want to be able to do this, but people like resist what they perceive to be control, and they perceive any kind of oversight to be control, and they don't want to be controlled. But that's where that comes in, because then it just depends on where I am from day to day, my own standards for what I think is appropriate and what I think it isn't appropriate. That's why we have a lot of laws, even, laws, traffic laws, because today I'm in a hurry, I want to go 90 miles an hour. Well, guess what? It's 60 miles zone. So you're going to get a ticket. Yep. You can't do that for the protection of everyone out there. Yeah. So that it's not just dependent upon, what I want to do today and what my standard is today. Like my standard today may not be what it was 5 years ago, or what it will be 5 years from now, or, basically how I'm feeling maybe even tomorrow, so by having that oversight, like there's a standard, an objective standard.
Yeah.
Well, I think too, like I think there's definitely those people who just really want to offer, they want to offer healing around sexuality, or at the very least, maybe they don't think of it as healing, but better sex. And that is truly their intention. And maybe their school or what they've gotten as far as teaching goes doesn't have a code of ethics, but that's, they're in good intention. And then there's other people, and I think, whether it's Tantra or just generally sacred sexuality, we tend to draw in these people, and they tend to have at least narcissistic tendencies, if not, getting to that full-blown sort of narcissistic type of personality, where this practice, whatever it is really about grandiosity and self-aggrandizement. And that's where this shit gets very scary.
Yeah. So now we're getting into some of the things to watch out for, in terms of, for all of you in our listening audience who want to explore Tantra. And again, we're not the only school for Tantra. There's other schools for Tantra that work better. Like, we're very focused on this Tibetan Buddhist approach and healing with the 5 elements. We practice Tantra as medicine. Some people just want to practice Tantra as play or connection or whatever, and that's awesome. But when examining your teacher, and you should examine your teacher, and examining your school, and not just like, I want to put a word of caution here, because it's not just having a fancy website. Dude, I know how to build a fancy website. Like, you can make a fancy website and you can make it all shiny and pretty and diverse and all those things, but that doesn't mean that you are practicing ethically. And that doesn't mean that what you're offering is medicine, or what they, are offering is medicine. So it's important to be mindful of the shiny, glossy, glittery stuff, because just because it's shiny and glossy doesn't mean it's authentic, and doesn't mean that it's medicine. But in terms of things to watch out for in your provider, essentially, that's what we're talking about. We're talking about your Tantra, Neo Tantra provider. What are some things that you've seen, Rosie, that it's like, okay, that's a red flag. If you see that, walk away?
I think so. A big red flag, and then I'm going to get to a subtle red flag. So a big red flag is do a little scrolling through their social media, and you can see usually people repeat the same pattern again and again, or you can see people having like a shit show of a life in the background as they're pretending on social media to be like, I'm, love and light and flowing and whatever. But if you just dig a little bit, and then the other thing I do, it doesn't matter what, type of sexuality, if I'm looking for a teacher in the realm of sexuality, even other Buddhist teachers, I will Google their name and sexual assault allegations or sexual misconduct allegations just to see what comes up. And if any of those come up, big red flag. Yeah. So that's for me the big, but then there's also subtle red flags. And I'm seeing a lot of people get sucked into this. And I've heard people say to me, oh yeah, that felt yucky when I read that, but I wasn't sure. And they're the expert, so I took it as okay. So what I'm seeing happening a lot in the world of Tantra online, it's people are talking about their relationships and putting forward this idea of relationship where actually it's a fucking trauma bond, or they're in highly dysfunctional relationships and they're normalizing. And so they have these great platforms and all these people are like, that's beautiful, that's amazing. And I'm like, that is not healthy. What they're putting out to the world is really not healthy. They're just normalizing their own dysfunction or the abuse that they're perpetually getting into. right? As opposed to healing it.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. Because I wanted to, you and I have had this conversation a bit about seeing that tendency. And I was watching another Tantra provider who was writing about their, their day and their sex life with their partner, and and they argued, and then they had great makeup sex, and then they argued again, and it's like this pattern. I'm like, dude, I'm 46. If I'm arguing that much in my relationship, it's fucking time for a divorce. Like, if we are arguing every time we set up a Tantra date and we're having big explosions, and then our makeup sex is the best sex we have, that's not healthy. Like, I don't want to have makeup sex every 2 days because our relationship is so volatile. That's not equanimity. That's not emotional stability. Like, when my husband and I were first getting together, like, well, it was in the first year of our relationship, and my husband would call Lamatashi would be like, well, how's your relationship? And Chris is like, it's really smooth and even. And Lamatashi's like, great. That's awesome. That's good balance. That's equanimity. That may not be, it's not explosive, and it's not volatile, and it's not like climactic, but again, that's a reflection of our Tantra. Our Tantra is not trying to have climaxes. Our Tantra is about diving deep into like the inner workings of our consciousness, and like being anchored and rooted and grounded in this experience of wholeness and bliss and joy. And when we do have an argument, it's like, fuck, what was that? Wow, we need to like examine and like understand what the trauma and the trigger was, because we don't want to keep doing that. That's painful.
This medicine is healing all aspects. That's what I say to people. I'm like, what are you healing? Do you have the potential to heal all aspects of your life? Because if you don't, you're missing out. This medicine in particular, authentic Tantra, right? And this Tibetan 5-element heals all aspects. So even without thinking about it, you are starting to heal those relationship dynamics. And then many of us, especially if we're teachers and we're coaches and we're healers, we actually are thinking about that shit. We're learning about what a healthy relationship looks like. We're doing that work. We're going to counseling and dealing with our shit because we don't want to bring that forward.
Well, and we want to heal. It hurts. I don't like suffering. I've suffered for, most of my freaking life. That's why I teach Tantra now, is because it was the antidote to my suffering. It was healing the root cause of my suffering. I don't want to suffer more. I want to alleviate suffering. Why would I want to create more suffering? How about you, Karen? What are some of the red flags that you see that you're like, you might want to find a different provider?
I mean, I think that first of all, it's just like looking for any kind of provider, and to be really honest, some people spend more time vetting, the person who's gonna fix their roof or do their lawn than they do, the person who's gonna be mucking around in their psyche and their sexuality and their traumas and all of those things. So, I mean, it's really about, first of all, some of it is just like your gut. It's like Rosie alluded to that, like people who are like, I felt something a little icky here, but, I thought, okay, well, they must know, and I don't know. So, and that can be part of their trauma, or one of the symptoms of their trauma, that absence of really trusting themselves.
Absolutely.
But, that gut, if you've got a gut instinct that it's like, I don't know about this, you don't need to go there, explore it a little further, or talk to someone, someone else who's worked with them. Like, if I'm looking for, it can be a hairdresser, it can be, a doctor, whatever it is. Typically I'll ask my friends or whomever, have you, who do you go to? And that kind of thing. So some of it is also just someone you trust. What has been your experience? Everybody looks at, all like, you go to a restaurant and you look at the reviews, and so it's like there should be, like, Rosie was saying, like on social media, maybe not, 5 stars versus 1 star, but at least something that tells you, like, what are the experiences other people are having with this? And then what are the conversations they're having? It's like you're having these conversations. If who you're thinking of working with isn't having these conversations, isn't talking about ethics, isn't talking about lineage, isn't talking about integrity and oversight, that's a red flag. That's a red flag for me. if you're not even talking about it? And if you are talking about it, what are you saying about it?
Yeah.
You know, are you willing to be accountable?
Yeah.
Accountable to someone else? Like, that tells me a lot. If you're willing to have some degree of oversight, whether it's Lineage, you know, your you know, whoever the lineage holder is, whether it's you know, a code of ethics, like, you know, in the law, the code of professional responsibility, you know, that kind of thing, like that's something that you're seeking, and that's important to you. Because if it's important to you, there's a good chance you're not going to violate it.
Well, yeah, and I find that, so we are government accredited, and I like to toot that horn because it's a big freaking deal, and it took a tremendous amount of work, and we have to recertify every year. It's not one and done. Like, we have to jump through hoops every single year to ensure that our school is running according to their guidelines, and our students are getting the education that we say that they're getting for the price that we say that they're getting it. Like, we've had to, you know, like, all kinds of stuff, and in all honesty, I find it a relief to work with this organization, this government, this accrediting board, to be like, okay, because we want to be in integrity. We want to be in integrity, and we want to ensure that our students are receiving the highest quality of instruction that they can possibly get. And we want to make sure that all of our ducks line up and all of our things are in a row. And so when they're like, hey, wait a minute, you said this here, but this is what's on your website, we're like, oh, okay, thank you for letting us know. Let us correct that. So, because we want everything to be as succinct and clean as possible, so the transmission is uncluttered, so the transmission is clear. And I love that our students have the security of knowing that the government is keeping an eye on us. And like, you know, like, if we didn't have the good sense to be accountable to ourselves, then the government. I love that.
So reassuring as a graduate that I have to get recertified. So you guys, as the institute, get recertified, but I have to get recertified every year. So that means I have to be really clear on what I know. You guys need to be clear on what I know and what I'm still teaching and how I'm practicing. And my clients know that I'm getting recertified every year, that I have to go through all this material again, and that if there's blind spots, or as the program changes and you teach different things, that's my opportunity, rather than like, oh, Rosie, you've got this wrong. It's like, oh, here's my opportunity to go back, dive into that spot and learn more.
Exactly.
And what I'm offering.
Exactly. Yeah. So it is a red flag to me, for someone to not want to have some sort of accountability. And again, not, you don't have to do what we did. We did what we did, but it's just having the checks and balances in place. Really, really, I mean, that has upped our game tremendously, having to go through this accreditation process, because we had to have like the curriculum and learning objectives and make sure everything's synced and ensure that if our students took our program, they would fulfill the learning objectives so that they could graduate. Like, they're not fucking around here. They're like, if they're paying you money to go through a training program, are they going to get what you're selling? Yeah, that's a big deal. So what are some other things that we see in the realm? So one of the things that came up in our conversations, Rosie, was this concept of Tantra festivals, which seem like kind of a smorgasbord or a buffet of all the kinds of janky shit we've been talking about. And I haven't participated in any Tantra festivals for one of those reasons, and also because I don't like teaching for free anymore. But but you've had your eye on them. So what are some of the things that you see in terms of Tantra festivals?
Well, so I was asked to teach at one in November, and I accepted, and it was beautiful. But I actually asked to see the list of other teachers before I would agree to it. Right. And they had this really great list of people that I was like, wow, these people have great training, and a lot of them are lineage based. And there was a couple of us from the Institute there, and I was like, amazing. And that's not generally what I'm seeing in festivals. A lot of the festivals, because people are like, well, why don't you teach at this festival or that festival? And I'm like, all you have to do is Google that festival and see all the sexual misconduct allegations that have come up against it. And they're still fucking running. Or you can see that they hired in the last couple of years teachers who are master Tantra teachers who have massive sexual misconduct allegations against them. And they're continuing to hire these predatory types of people. And then on the other side, like the stories I'm hearing from people going, they're like, well, it's basically, it's an orgy. It's like we go do some classes and we hook up with people and we go fuck people and we talk about our trauma. And, that's our weekend. And I'm like, that for me does not sound like a safe container.
Yeah, I agree. As a trauma survivor, I can't think of anything more horrific. I remember like the whole, like when oming was coming out, like, and I'm going to talk about this because there's a one taste expose, but when that was coming out, I was like, as a trauma survivor, I cannot think of anything more re-traumatizing than having some dude that I've never fucking met look at my vulva and stroke my clitoris, and like I'm just not supposed to have any connection with him. I'm just supposed to be like just some dude, random dude that's gonna like that. I've had random dudes touching my body my entire life. I cannot imagine anything more re-traumatizing than that experience. And then the gaslighting that goes along with, well, if you were enlightened enough, if you were sexually empowered enough, you wouldn't have a problem. That's scary. How about you, Karen? Because you have participated in some online Tantra festivals recently. So what are some of the good things you've seen, and what are some of the concerning things that you've witnessed?
Well, because they were online, and I was going to ask Rosie if the one she participated in was online or in person.
It was
because
online.
I think I'm sorry?
It was online.
Oh, okay. Because I think that there's a difference because like obviously you're not all in this same place at the same time and all these things going on. Everybody's in their own home, and then there's COVID, and just like watching a screen and watching, whatever practitioner or Tantra instructor they're interested in, like watching that, and they're not in the energy of this mix. So I can't honestly say that I know what goes on in those settings where it's in person, because I didn't start teaching at Tantra festivals until they were online. So I'd like to think that they're, all in integrity and the way it's supposed to be. But I don't know.
Well, but you brought up a good point, Rosie, is like Google the names of the people involved and see if there's sexual assault or sexual misconduct allegations. And it's, when you do that, it's alarming. Like I'm not naming any names on this podcast, but there's a very well-known Tantra school, one of the top, quote unquote, in North America that, the allegations of sexual misconduct coming out of that school, I cannot believe that more people are not in jail. Like, I really cannot believe that people are getting away with abusing clients and still being in business. Like, I've had people get mad at me because I wouldn't let them steal my content, or like threaten to sue me because I didn't certify them because I couldn't teach right, Like, if we were sexually abusing our students, I don't know how you function in that way. And go on.
Sorry, go ahead.
No, go on.
I was going to say the other thing too is like within the festival context, I think it's really challenging to create a space where in one class people are going to be diving into their trauma, and then the next thing you're going to do is you really host this open sexual free-for-all. Like,
play party.
I have explored sexuality in many different contexts, and I was a sex worker. I'm very pro-sex. But we were not diving into our trauma before the orgy. We were just having the orgy. The orgy was just the orgy. It wasn't this spiritual new age, I'm going to heal your sexual abuse thing. Tell me, let's get into the depths of your trauma and then go fuck a bunch of different people. That creating safe space for that, I think is pretty much impossible.
Well, and that circles back to, who are these people saying they're going to hold space for you in your trauma? Are they actually qualified? Like, exactly. I'm very clear. I am not a trauma therapist. I am trauma informed. I've done tons of research on it, continue to research on it. I know our graduates do research on it. We have information about it, but we are not therapists. And we do insist that when we work with clients, like, do you have a support network? Where are you at in relationship to your trauma? Have you had therapy? Do you have a therapist? Do you have additional support beyond what we can provide? Because I am not qualified to be your therapist. I am qualified to coach you. I am qualified to support you and give you, insight and mirror back to you, growth and that sort of thing. But I'm not qualified to walk you through, give you therapy for your trauma. But here's a list of providers who can, so that we can work in tandem with you.
Well, I mean, the other issue is that there are people out there who don't even have any understanding about trauma at all. I mean, it's not even like they're pretending that they're trauma informed or trauma coaches, therapists. I mean, they don't have a clue. And so people are coming to them with trauma that somebody who's at least trauma informed will recognize as trauma. But they don't know the signs of trauma. They don't know the expressions of trauma, like none of those things. They don't even know when, they're somebody's in front of them who's dissociating. Yeah. It's like they have no idea. So they're doing further harm if for no other reason, just out of their own ignorance. Yeah. And that's not acceptable either.
No. No,
yeah,
absolutely.
Exactly. And that's why it's like the wild, wild world of the West, when it comes to Neo Tantra. And I guess that's my plea. And that would be, we've been complaining. So what would I like to see? What I would like to see is I would like Neo Tantra practitioners to qualify that they're practicing Neo Tantra. They're not just using this umbrella, because that's obfuscating. It's bullshit, quite frankly. It's not just Tantra. It is a specific emanation of Tantra that is rooted in cultural appropriation and rooted in all this other stuff. Yes, it may have some remnants of the authentic teachings. That's wonderful. But please classify it as what it is. It is an adaptation. It is not authentic Tantra. And if you are trained in Indian or Shivite or the other styles of Hindu, Indian, non-Buddhist Tantra, quantify that, let your audience know. And we are rooted in Tibetan Buddhist practices. We are Tibetan 5-element Tantra, which we have been given permission to teach, which is authentic to this lineage. It is a specific style of Tantra that we are practicing and teaching, and we put that right up front in the name. So it's that would be my wish and my plea for, instead of just running around saying, oh, it's a Tantra festival, say it's a Neo Tantra festival, so that we understand what we're saying yes to and we can prepare ourselves accordingly.
But then there are people who wouldn't know what Neo Tantra is.
Let's educate them. That's part of the issue. So, I have to educate people every day about what fucking the 5 elements are.
Could you explain specifically what lineage Tantra means? Because there's a lot of people who are like, yeah, I'm part of a lineage. I read this book. I'm totally in alignment with what those people say. Right? So
yeah.
Actually what lineage means, please.
Yeah, that's great. So lineage means that the teachings originated with an enlightened being who had achieved verifiable realization of their ultimate nature. And that their methods, when practiced appropriately and with guidance, would also lead to realization of your ultimate nature. So that means realization of who you are besides this ego, this personality, this body, this form. So realization of your ultimate nature. In this tradition, all of the teachings originated with the Buddha and then spread. And then this specific lineage was founded by Naguma, who was an enlightened woman. They called her the Black Dakini. She was very brown. She lived in the woods. She had bones in her hair. She was this mystic and this highly realized being who transmitted her teachings through sexual union to her students, and one in particular who took those teachings and then began the lineage, the Shangpa Kagyu lineage. Lineage does not mean that like I've heard people say Margot Anand is a lineage. Margot Anand is not enlightened. Margot Anand is not a lineage. She is not a sanctioned teacher of any tradition. She is a Neo-Tantra person. That's great. That's wonderful. She's got wonderful teachings. She's not a Buddha, and she's not the founder of any lineage. I'm not the founder of a lineage. I have taken refuge in a lineage, and I have permission from my Lama to share those teachings to lay people. so that they can spread and propagate and proliferate and bring medicine and healing. And again, in that accountability, if what I was doing was causing harm, I would no longer have the privilege of doing what I'm doing. So that is Lineage.
Amen.
All right, so we gotta go because it's been an hour and it's been awesome, but shit, we'll have to come back and do more. So let's give your website. So Karen Craig at exploretantra.com. Karen is like big in the world, big in festivals, online, talking to people, and is going to be teaching at an event this summer for military survivors of sexual assault in the military. So if you want to find out more about that, you can go to our website, authentictantra.com, under retreats. It's listed, as well as on your website. Where would that event be posted on your website, Karen?
It should be on our exploretantra.com.
Yes.
It should be.
Should be. All right. Well, we'll let the web designer know. We better get it up if it's not now. So exploretantra.com for Karen Craig. Karen Craig is also one of our faculty for the Institute. She's one of our Tantra Mastery instructors and one of our certification instructors. So she's a pretty big deal. She can flex. And then Rosie Bits at rosiebits.com, another one of our illustrious graduates doing amazing work in the world. Tell us a little bit about what you have coming up here, Rosie.
So really quick, in the next couple of weeks, I have a course called Empowered Dating. I am working with a counselor, and the two of us are bringing our knowledge. So certified sexologist and tantrika over here, counselor over there. We're jamming it all together to really help people date in a way where they feel empowered, where they can do some personal healing and really get the results they want. So that's what I got right away.
Beautiful. Awesome. So find out more about that at rosiebits.com. And if you have signed up for episodes of Sex is Medicine, you will be getting that hitting your inbox every Saturday morning. And we will have the promotions for both of these events in that. So sign up so you're notified. Thank you so much for joining us once again for our new season. I think this is our 8th season of Sex is Medicine. Oh my God, we're going on 8 years. That's insane. We haven't stopped yet. We'll see how long we last. Thank you for joining us every Thursday evening at 7 p.m. on Contact Talk Radio. And make sure to stay in touch between shows at authentictantra.com and Authentic Tantra on all of your amazing social media. We love you. Thank you for listening. Have a beautiful, beautiful night.